A convoy of truck drivers and their supporters who oppose vaccine mandates made its way through the GTA today en route to Ottawa. Like many protests, the group is varied. Some of those in the convoy include truckers and their supporters who oppose the federal government's mandate that cross-border Canadian truckers need to be vaccinated to avoid a quarantine on our soil.
And some supporters oppose anti-government mandates overall, but pandemic-related protests have, at times, become attractive to and for extremists, conspiracy theorists, and those who espouse aggressive and violent rhetoric. So, will this protest have any impact other than creating awareness, uniting some Canadians, angering others, and causing some traffic woes? Let's find out. Joining us now are Mike Millian, president of the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, James Menzies, the editor of Today's Trucking, and Ofer Barron, a professor of operations management at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Thank you all for joining us tonight. So I'm going to start with you for a moment, Mike. I mean, will this really have an impact? Protests do sometimes in terms of creating awareness, as we've noted, but the government is not going to, reverse this mandate, at least not anytime soon.
Well, thanks for having me tonight. For the border mandate, for it to have any effect, what has to happen is both countries need to get together, because if Canada removes their border mandate, but the U.S. doesn't remove theirs, our drivers still can't get in there. So will it have an effect? It's raising awareness, that's for sure. But it's unlikely at this time that they're going to delay it. But just because something's unlikely doesn't mean you don't keep pushing for it, because it is going to cause issues on our supply chain, and has a little bit already. But no, I think we also have to look that there's a federal vaccine mandate on the horizon for domestic drivers that's supposed to come into effect in early 2022. That one we maybe have more of a chance of getting delayed or having an effect on.
So, Mike, what is your feeling overall about this convoy? I mean, as we mentioned in the introduction to our panel here tonight, the message essentially, truckers tired of mandates, government mandates, vaccine mandates, but in the midst of that, and this has happened with other protests across the country throughout the pandemic, this extremism that it becomes almost a magnet for it, even if it's a fringe minority.
Yeah, the extremist groups that have latched onto this and kind of taken hold and taken the message for themselves are a little concerning. Now, we heard some of the organizers from the convoy today come and speak out against those extremist movements and ask the drivers that were in the protest if they're hearing of any violence or any rhetoric to call them, and they'll report it to the police. So we're glad to hear that. But there's no place for that in a peaceful protest. If you want to get your word out there and you want to be heard and respected, you got to be peaceful, you got to be polite, and you got to make sure you're not affecting people's safety and freedom of movement out on the road. So, most of the people that are being extreme, I don't believe are the truckers themselves. I believe they're these groups that have latched on, and the truckers that are in the convoy that are trying to have a peaceful protest need to speak up, and I think and hope some of them have.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to bring in here James Menzies, who is the editor of Today's Trucking. James, you've talked about this in your publication and as an editor, and you talked a bit about the impact, noting that in the past, convoys like this aren't very impactful. What do you think? I mean, millions of dollars here have come in from across the country and beyond.
Yeah, one of my concerns is the source of the fundraising that's behind this. I mean, the fundraisers themselves don't have a direct connection to the trucking industry. The primary fundraiser is actually affiliated with the Maverick Party, which is a separatist federal party based in Alberta. And, they've raised almost $6.5 million now. So this is a well-funded movement. And, I do question whether this is a trucking-led initiative or whether it's more of a political movement that's attached itself to the frustrations of a small segment of the truck driver population.
Mr. Menzies, we've been talking about this for a little while now, but in terms of the progress of this movement and obviously these fringe movements that have kind of come out of it, what do you see happening next? What do you, I guess, see for the future of the movement itself?
It's very difficult to say what's going to happen because, as Mike alluded to, we've got some other potential bad actors that have attached themselves to the attention that this convoy has attracted right across the country. So I do have concerns that that the truck drivers that are involved, I don't have concerns about their behavior, but that they could be taken advantage of by some others that want to use this as a platform to get their own messages out, and that's a concern to me. Especially considering the fact that with all the discussion around the convoy, I don't see a lot of discussion around the real trucker issues, issues like lack of parking, access to washrooms and stuff at shippers and receivers, detention time at shippers and receivers. That dialogue seems to be missing from this movement, so I do question the motives.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about the issues. I'm going to ask Mike as well about the issues in just a moment. I want to bring in Ofer. What will be the impact on the supply chain?
Well, obviously, it's not helping. Having said that, I think there is still only a minority of people that are involved in the convoy, so there shouldn't be too much of a long-term impact. And similarly, with respect to the restrictions that are put from both sides of the border, I believe that the logistic companies will be able to manage them in a sensible fashion, and they're not going to have too large of an impact.
When we talk about, operations and economics, does this make sense to you, Ofer, that, $6 million donated to truckers to drive across the country? I recognize the organizer saying some of the money will go to charity, but as James mentions, there's some real issues impacting the trucking industry. Could this money not have been better spent? What do you think?
Well, there are many places where we can donate our money towards many great objectives. If some people feel that this is the most important way to put their money forward, we have to respect that.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was just looking at it from an economics perspective. So, Mike, let's bring you in about the real issues facing the industry. Something that James has noted, there are a number of issues, and these are not new issues. And if you can elaborate as to what they are, and is that message becoming clear? Is it lost in vaccine mandates?
Well, I mean, when this convoy started, it was supposed to be about vaccine mandates, right? And if you listen to some of the people that have talked now, it's kind of become about just everything to do with freedoms of movement and our privileges being taken away, and they're not really talking about any of the issues in the trucking industry at all. And James touched on some of them. Safe, clean, well-lit parking for truck drivers has been an issue. I started in this industry as a driver 32 years ago. We were talking about that then. Access to clean washrooms for drivers has always been an issue, either at truck stops out on the road, rest areas, or at shippers and receivers premises. And that was really highlighted when the pandemic started, when the few places that the drivers did have to go were locked down. And then we had to, fight to get their access back so they could use the washrooms. And,
Mike, I remember that. I want to say here in Ontario, I mean, it's something the transport minister here has spoken about. And I remember early days of the pandemic being out reporting, I couldn't find anywhere to go to the washroom. So I could just imagine being on the road for hours and being turned away. Not to mention, some of these locations like a drive-through. It was for some establishments, it's drive-through only. Can't even fit through with your truck. So it was hard for people to even have something to eat or drink.
Yeah, for sure. And I think other thing we have to look at is, a systematic pay issue. Our largest turnovers in our long-haul industry. Part of that's lifestyle. Not as many people want to be away from home nights at a time like they did years ago. Both members of a family are usually involved in raising their kids now, but the fact that we pay by the mile as well, I think is something you're seeing some companies starting to transition out of, and I think something eventually we're all going to have to transition out of when we got to move into a salary or pay by the mile, a salary or pay by the hour. Because if you're stuck in a traffic jam for traffic not moving for 3 or 4 hours and you're not getting compensated for it, it becomes frustrating for a driver, right? So I think moving to a different pay model is something as an industry that we need to get our heads wrapped around as well.
Mike, something I asked James as well, and I know we've kind of touched on it in this conversation, but in terms of the bigger picture moving forward, I know Ottawa's next. It's something obviously we're expecting to see a large turnout. What do you, I guess, expect to see in Ottawa, and then moving forward from there in terms of a reaction from the federal government?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm hoping it's going to be peaceful. I'm hoping everybody's going to be polite. They're going to be peaceful. They have a plan. They know where they're going to go, because we don't want this to turn turn bad and put a stain on our industry and a movement. So I'm confident that the drivers will. It's the others that have grabbed onto this that, may show up to Ottawa to lash onto this that I'm worried about, those from outside the industry. So hopefully none of that happens. And where's Ottawa going to do going forward? Like I said, we need to look at this federal mandate that they're talking about as well. And this is going to have an issue on our supply chain. I know it was mentioned that you thought the logistics companies would look after it well, and trucking industry has a habit of figuring out ways to get through difficult times. But the problem is with this border mandate, according to our research, we've removed roughly 30,000 drivers out of 20,000, 30 to 40,000 drivers out of 120,000 from cross-border trade. You can't replace that kind of capacity. So we may find a way to make sure you don't have shortages in the products you want, but the inflation we're seeing at the stores is going to get worse. I've talked to some of our members who in the last 2 weeks moving produce up from the southern part of the States, and most of our produce, fruits, and vegetables are coming from the southern U.S. right now. Their shipping prices have already gone up 50% in the last 2 weeks since this mandate came into effect. So the 5.7% inflation we saw at grocery stores in December before we put this in place, it's going to get worse.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mike, James, Ofer. We appreciate the three of you joining us tonight. And certainly this convoy continues to roll and make its way to Ottawa. So it's a conversation we'll continue. Thank you to the three of you.
Thank you for having us.